Finally did it. I finally got you, Harry. That we're back connected. Great to see you, and thanks for being on our Leaders Who Care series.
Mark, thanks for having me on. It's great to be with you today.
Well, I'm super excited about sharing what you do, and best way to start is if you could briefly introduce yourself. Don't tell the whole thing. There won't be anything else to talk about, but briefly introduce yourself, and we'll go from there.
Sure. So Harry Nelson, I am the founder of Nelson Hardiman, among other organizations. But Nelson Hardiman is the law firm that I started 20 years ago. I've been practicing as a healthcare lawyer for about 25 years. And my particular areas of focus have been in areas of innovation, helping people figure out the kind of regulatory pathway to do things that haven't been done before in healthcare, or in times of, in areas of transformation. And I also do a lot of crisis response, which has led me into a lot of, trying to find ways to be impactful, socially impactful, seeing where things go wrong in healthcare.
And tell us a little bit about you, family.
Yeah, so I'm originally, I was actually born in Brazil, but my parents are Americans. I grew up mostly in suburban Detroit. I'm a proud Wolverine, University of Michigan, go blue. And I worked after law school. I went to Hawaii I went to college and law school at Michigan, and then I went out to clerk for a judge in Hawaii, and then started my legal career in Chicago in the mid 90s, and came out to California 2001. And I'm coming up. It's actually, I just realized I last 2 weeks ago was 20 years in Los Angeles. So I was about to say almost 20 years, which is what I usually say. But anyway, so yeah, so that is my, and personally, I'm coming up on 24 years married to my wife, Dorit, and we have 4 kids who are, my oldest is about to be 21. He's actually a soldier in the Israeli army.
Really?
I have a daughter who's studying in a post-high school program, and my younger 2 are in both in high school. So that's my life.
That's awesome. I'll have to talk to you about some of our dealings and stuff we're doing in Israel and now the UAE and all that stuff. But no, I noticed that you probably don't miss winter either. You can visit it like I do, right?
It's a funny thing. When I worked in Hawaii, before I went there and clerked for a judge, I worked there a summer in law school. And I remember I happened to be on the Big Island. I remember exactly where I was. I was sitting in a hot tub, and I'm talking to I don't even remember who it was, but some guy, and he just, I told him I was from Detroit. And he goes, so you finally figured out there's no reason to live in a cold climate. And I was 25 years old at the time, and I had never had that thought before, but I realized that was one of the truest things that anybody ever said to me.
Same here. I used to go down college break from Montreal to Florida all the time. Loved it. Never thought I'd leave Canada. Super patriotic Canadian and stuff like that. And then got offered this tremendous job in Florida, Miami, and since then it's like I will visit winter, not live in winter. I'll visit it. So with respect to, I mean, your education was philosophy, political sci. You got your JD, and clerked in Hawaii, like we talked about all that. And before we delve further into things, tell us really where you began. Where does Hawaiian healthcare began? Like, why do you do what you do?
It was a funny path. I growing up in Detroit, in suburban Detroit, I didn't think much about healthcare or about regulatory work. I think when I look back and try to make sense of how I got where when the pieces came together, I spent a summer in college interning for a congressman from Michigan, Sandy Levin. And that was my first exposure to all these regulatory agencies that kind of run our life. And I was fascinated because regulatory agencies are kind of this intersecting point between government and the whole life of our country and the economy. And I spent a lot of time that summer writing letters back to constituents on this project or that project. And I came away fascinated by regulation in general and regulatory work and by healthcare. It wasn't, I'll be honest, at the beginning of my career, healthcare was one of a few things I was interested in. But as time went on, I think it was also a feature of really starting practice in 1994. It was just a time when all of these regulations were changing. We had, the Stark regulations came in. So there were all these new fraud related issues coming up for doctors and hospitals. I was 2 years into practice when HIPAA came out, and all of a sudden we had a brand new federal privacy law, and everything was just changing very quickly. And so the 90s were really a time of transformation. And I saw that it was moving quickly, and there was a chance to be somebody who could understand it and explain it and help people navigate it. And that would seem to me to be a really a good way to invest my time. I did not think it would be the end all be all of my life, but I'm glad for having made that started on that path and continued.
Well, I didn't grow up thinking I was going to be a headhunter either. So I know that I was supposed to be a pro hockey player, but the players kept getting bigger. I don't know what the problem was. So, with what you said there, and what we talked about before, COVID-19 has shined, bright lights on U.S. healthcare that we probably should have known before, but even brighter. And well, you've earned the title of what is it? America's #1 healthcare attorney, right? So good title. So with respect to that, you've done a lot of work in opioid problem, the crisis, in cannabis, and the hospitals have been overwhelmed, et cetera. With all that said, tell us, where did you start in picking some of these issues, and who do you represent?
So it's funny, there's my actual practice kind of breaks down into three parts, right? I have a lot of early stage clients who want to do something that they're not quite sure, they haven't seen anybody do it before. In the last few years, it's been a ton of like telehealth companies or companies trying to use artificial intelligence, doing genomics work, psychedelics. It's always whatever's hot in healthcare. It's always hard to find people who seem to know about it. And I've been out early writing and speaking about things, and that's part of my practice. Another piece of it is people who, and generally for those people, it's telling them how to put their business together in a way to meet the requirements, federal and state law. And a lot of like just being a kind of counselor for companies throughout their growth and their own kind of journey. On the other side, I do a lot of work in kind of cleaning up the legal side of crisis, where people didn't get good legal advice or didn't get any advice, and then found themselves in a big hole where they're being accused of fraud or they've had patient safety problems. There is a third part of my practice that's just sort of the basic work that lawyers do of putting together contracts and deals and dealing with disputes. But those are the two kind of poles, crisis and venture. And they led me, what happened was, for me, was I enjoy the work tremendously, but the crisis side of the work made me really open my eyes to the fact that I was getting work because of a crisis that was getting worse and worse. People dropping dead, just an inattention to our addiction crisis, to the overdose deaths that were resulting, to the pain crisis, to mental health. And I started to feel that I needed to do something. There's a Talmudic phrase that really speaks to me. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I am only for myself, what will I be? What am I? And if not now, when? That's the phrase. And it's that middle part. Like if all I do is work on my law practice and take good care of my clients, like what am I? Like, am I really making a difference? And I started to feel that I needed to find a way to sleep at night by knowing that I was doing everything I could to try to make a difference and reduce the suffering and reduce the number of people who were just dying in these terrible problems that I had the privilege of working on.
Yeah, that's when I first met you, and I really got impressed, or really hit me, where you're talking about the opioids and the incredible, and that was like 2017ish or something. I can't remember, but everything's pre-COVID. How many years? And so it is really impressive, and then the problem continues unfortunately. But I wanted to move to something related to that. But I'm from Canada, as I told you, where we have socialized medicine been in place for years. There's pros and cons to that. Constantly, the U.S. is being compared to Canada or Finland or whatever. As we're hopefully looking for systemic change towards equal access to healthcare, which maybe is where some of the AI and all that comes in. Share with us what you meant by "Why Should You Care" as one of the titles of your books, part title. Why should we care? And what you now see happening in the future.
Well, I mean, so I wrote, that was the first book that I wrote was From Obamacare to Trump Care, Why Should You Care?
Right.
And I decided to write that book because after Donald Trump's election, Donald Trump's election came 6 years after the Affordable Care Act had started to really transform U.S. healthcare. It was the first major change in 50 years, right? Medicare and Medicaid were adopted in the U.S. in '65, and then in 2010, we had Obamacare, Affordable Care Act. And so I was frustrated. So my own view was that the Affordable Care Act was kind of a compromise. It was trying to get everybody in the room and try to do what Hillary Clinton couldn't do in the early 90s,
Right.
when I was in law school, actually, by trying to get the insurance companies and the pharmaceuticals and the doctors, everybody together, the hospitals, and try to make something that would meet everybody's needs. And so, and then, it became such a polarizing subject that it lost the Democrats Congress in 2010. And it was really a punching bag. And I was frustrated. I was frustrated with the entire kind of rhetoric around it. But after Donald Trump's election, what I noticed was people, the entire healthcare industry was sort of sitting up and trying to figure out where do we go from here? How much of the last 6 years is going to stay in place? How much of it is going away? And I was traveling. I was actually in Israel, and somebody had asked me to give a talk to a group of at a law firm, to a group of medical device companies, on the future, what to think about about how Obamacare was going to change. And they told me there'd be like 10 people there. And it turned out that it was in a room. When I got in the room, there were 60 people. It was like standing room only, and people were hanging on what I was saying. And so I had a long flight back that same night, and I thought to myself, to LA, I thought to myself, this is like a moment when it's important to say something, and why people should care is because ultimately what we should really care about is like how is U.S. healthcare, and the answer is not very good. And it's not like one side has all the answers. The Democrats had some important ideas about expanding access to care. The Republicans, I think, have some valuable points to make about how do we reduce the price of care. But the bottom line is we have a system where we pay more and get less than any country in the world, and everybody should care about that and want to change that.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. It's kind of one of the reasons why we like to work with leaders who care about this stuff. And it just seems like we should all be working on this together rather than just arguing about it. And did you ever do mediation or arbitration between political parties?
It's funny. I don't hold myself out as a mediator, but I've been asked to mediate 3 or 4 times over the last couple of years, and I enjoy it. And I try to play that role, right? I think the hard part is we're living in a time when everyone's so caught up, so feels so intensely about the rightness of their position and the
Right.
wrongness of the other side. And I think being able to call balls and strikes, and to call out your side is really important, and to be fair, be fair-minded. I don't feel like we're living in a time when that's really in high value. But I think we're not going to ever solve any of the big problems we have until we move back to a point when we can actually talk to each other and figure out some middle ground.
Yeah, we're all, it's funny. I compare things to sports a lot, and every team in a league wants to win the championship, and they'll do everything they can to win the championship. But the championship isn't worth much if the league sucks and the league's not a valuable league.
I love that analogy. I think that's actually the best. That's one of the best encapsulations I've heard. I'm going to steal that if that's all right.
Go for it.
Credit.
COVID-19 also sped up. We talked about this a little bit. Telehealth. I mean, it was coming, but just like remote working, the stuff got put on steroids with that. How do you see that impacting healthcare? And in a way, it's kind of going back to house calls, but virtually or something.
It's been really exciting. I've been involved in telehealth work for a long time. I had the privilege of working for some of the telehealth companies that today are these giants like Teladoc at an earlier point. And this year was like a gangbusters year. I just gave a talk, and I pulled together some data points, and it's pretty amazing. When the pandemic started, in the early part of the pandemic, the use of telehealth was 80 times higher, like by April 2020, than it was in February 2020. But what's interesting is that it went down, but we're still at 40 times pre-pandemic levels, and it's holding steady. And so it's clear that both doctors and patients attitudes have changed dramatically. Like there's been a continued growth, and we were going to get there, but it's almost like we went forward a decade in the space of a month in terms of advancing telehealth. And I think I think telehealth, it may not be for everything, but it sure does a good job for a lot of things. And it's pretty dramatic how much money we can save if we don't force doctors to see patients in the office for simple conditions, for things that can be managed. And just like you and I are speaking on the Zoom right now, we're seeing like in behavioral care, it's a dramatic thing. Most people would rather sit at home and talk to their therapist, or have psychotherapy, whatever counseling they're going to get across the Zoom platform. It gives them privacy. It saves them the travel time. So I think telehealth it's been a game changer. We still have further to go, but as a lawyer, it's been breathtaking to see how quickly not only attitudes but laws have changed, regulations have changed, and it's been a really just a gangbuster environment, which I find really exciting and good for U.S. healthcare.
Yeah, me too. I got a 94-year-old aunt who's in Montreal, and the last thing she wants to do is go out in the middle of the winter to go see the doctor you have to sometimes, but not for all the time. And it becomes a worse scenario. In fact, I saw a TV show a while back where it was one of the medical doctors TV shows, and they were doing telehealth, and this lady was on talking about the disease that she had, and multiple calls they had, and then the doctor realized that she was really smart in the symptoms and everything she was talking about. And she had researched all that stuff. She just wanted somebody to talk to. So she made up the actual disease so they would talk to her. This is a TV show, but there's reality in there too sometimes. So yeah. It's fascinating, but I also think it's amazing. That's why I kind of compared it to going back to house calls, but not really. Maybe the holograms will be the house calls. We're living in an amazing time, and the technology is getting to a point now where it's getting lower and lower costs to actually get incredible amounts of data. Right, we're seeing the ability to get blood pressure and other cardiopulmonary vitals very simply through your iPhone or through low cost equipment. And the next step that I have the privilege of working on now, that I think is going to be rolling out over the next couple of years, is the ability to get inside the human genome and actually give people a roadmap to their own health that no generation in history has ever had. Yeah, we have a client who you mentioned AI before. Through AI, they're able to detect the retinal therapy, whatever it's called, and to prevent diabetes and prevent blindness, etc. And it's amazing for being available to have equal access to healthcare in underserved areas and whatnot. And just seeing so many things in AI that are Star Trek material or whatever that you wouldn't have thought of before. One of the things I wanted to ask you, because you do deal with a lot of business people, is corporate leaders, entrepreneurs and whatnot, they finally recognize that you can even do better economically if you do good, if you make social impact. And it's also impacting who you're able to attract, because talent, especially young people, they want to go to a place where they'll both make money and do good at the same time. How do you see leaders being these days? Are they being more leaders who care about the well-being of their talent, like their financial, their physical, their mental well-being? Do you see changes in that? I do think there's been changes. I think it's not it's not absolute. I mean, I think, we're still living in a time, like living in Los Angeles. I'm acutely aware that the lawyers that we hire are really attracted to high salaries, no matter how great of a culture or how much we live our values and demonstrate integrity and social impact. It's not enough because we have people who have young families, and they want to buy a house. They need to, figure out their lives. So it's not an all or nothing, but I do think we're living in a time when where people are paying attention, and people are much more comfortable, being out there about what they're passionate about. And I do feel that it's been a real blessing just to be able to be myself and to be open about the things I'm passionate about.
and not to, in a previous generation, I'm not sure I would have had like partners, for example, who were supportive of me putting out a book about the opioid crisis, which took time away from practicing law, because that was something that I was passionate about. But what I found is what it does is it doesn't necessarily lead to more business being done, but it connects you with a community of people, of like-minded people, of people who are passionate, and also committed really to living their values. And I think I do like to think there's more, not only more openness towards doing that, that we're living in a time when it's easier to connect with people around the country, right, because of all the digital connection that we have. And so like I found it to be really a blessing, and I don't think I'm alone. I think that anybody who gets out there and is willing to be passionate and speak out about the things, and try to do things to change, to make positive change, are going to find much more support than they ever could in the past.
So do you think, there's all those terrible jokes people talk about attorneys all the time. Do you think people are actually caring more about attorneys these days?
I think, our system is complicated. I'm a patriotic American, but I do feel like we are so overregulated, and we become such a litigious society that we have. It's crazy how many lawyers we have. And yet, like, I feel good about the work that we're doing, and most lawyers. I'm not going to say all lawyers, but I would say most lawyers, I think, are doing good work. But I don't know if people care about us. There's too many. I still get my share of lawyer jokes. It's a dangerous. We're in a very delicate role that I understand all the jokes, but such is life.
One last thing, well, maybe a couple of last things on this part. Do you find any specific legal issues that have come up with respect to the overwhelming busyness, for lack of a better word, that hospitals have had to handle?
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot. Well, there's a lot of things to say about the sort of the stress on the system of hospitals, right? We've been living in a decade when there's been this push to reduce the level of acuity, to sort of increase the level of acuity, to say that hospitals should only be treating the sickest patients, that people should be in lower care settings. Ultimately, there's a push to get people home, to get people to have the procedure, for example, the surgery, but by the same day, be at home recuperating. And I think we've been trying for over a decade to get hospitals to operate less like hotels, where they just make money because they stay busy filling their rooms with people. The challenge of the pandemic showed that our hospital infrastructure is really challenged in moments of crisis, right? We had all these very, very sick people who needed care, and hospitals were just absolutely overwhelmed. And our system of how we pay for hospital care is so broken that I have hospital clients that have lost tens of millions of dollars in the last year or two, just by virtue of being COVID surge hospitals that took people in, and because all the way we pay for hospitals is so bizarre and so broken. So I do think that I think there's a lot of positive technology attention being spent on how do we make it possible to get really good care, remotely or in lower acuity settings than in hospitals. And I think that's generally fixing things. But I think COVID-19 called a lot of attention to the ways in which our hospitals are broken, and our hospital reimbursement is broken, and we just have a lot of work to do to fix them.
Yeah, I remember, you don't have enough time for this. I remember when there was a thing called zero-based budgeting was in play, and every year you had to start at zero, which you really need, but you really started at what was the overall goal of the company or the hospital or whatever at the beginning, and what do you need to achieve that goal? And so I wonder, I know that's a simplification, but I wonder if that could ever happen.
It's so the thing that the moment that really I thought should have been revealing to everybody in the country about how broken our hospitals were, when there was talk at one point of trying to sort of force hospitals to take Medicare rates, right? Medicare is the largest single payer in the country for healthcare. Something like 40% of US healthcare is paid for by Medicare. And hospitals universally all said, no, we're going to go out of business if we have to take what Medicare pays. So, and you could go on with lots of examples, but it basically shows you that hospitals depend on getting, huge amounts of essentially overpayment from a handful of patients who have like employer self-funded, self-insured employer plans that overpay. And then they have other cases where government programs like Medicaid underpay. And the whole system, when you have a system where if every hospital had to take the prevailing rate that the government pays, it would go out of business. Something that, to me, that signals that the whole system is completely broken.
Yeah, I agree. It's just got to be a better way. Well, last question on this part. About a quarter of the way through 2021, I had a client that told me, he was talking about 2020. He said, Mark, the year has flown by slowly. And I thought that was brilliant, actually, because that's impossible to that, but you get it. So what I wanted to ask you is, what are you most grateful for in what's happened the last couple of years? And what are you most hopeful for?
I think, it's a good question. It's a tough question. I would say the thing I'm most personally grateful for is that COVID, the pandemic sort of forced me. I was in a period where I had just written The United States of Opioids, and I was traveling. I had invitations to speak. I was going to 2 or 3 conferences a month minimum, and basically, flying everywhere, speaking. And I was kind of a little run ragged from trying to be everywhere. And so basically being forced to stay home with my wife, with my kids, really, and in my office, forced me to sort of really reevaluate, how happy I was kind of with that schedule, and all of the net, as much as I enjoy connecting and get energized by meeting new people, it made me realize that there is like a deep pleasure to be had in just, shrinking things down, slowing things down. And it forced me to get back to the work that I had been a little bit distanced from, right? I was depending more on lawyers in my firm to do a lot more of the day-to-day stuff. And it made me really grateful for all the gifts, both personal and professional, that I think I was kind of taking for granted because I was sort of, trying to pursue the next level of whatever. And so that was probably the biggest, for me, the biggest thing. Was there a second half of your question? I forgot.
Yeah. What are you most hopeful for?
Oh, what am I? Okay. Yeah. Also tough. My hope is that we hold on, that we don't just like revert back to the way things were. I see a lot of signs that the stress is coming back and people are, everyone that there's a lot of negative things that, some of the quiet time is ending. I just hope we hold on to some of the freedom. Like, for example, I find I structure my day very differently. I used to feel like I had to be in the office by this hour and be here till that hour. And I couldn't, I had to make myself available all the time. And I find I personally take a lot more personal liberty to sort of make sure that it's working for me and that I'm in a healthy place, a healthy state of mind. And I think, I hope that for all of us, that we don't just lose the, there were a lot of, it was a time of clarity about what really mattered. And I hope we hold on to that.
Yeah, we have short memories, but I think it'd be a tragedy if it'll be a worse tragedy, COVID, if we don't learn from it and not have short memories. So yeah, well said. Thanks, man. That was awesome. Really appreciate the conversation. I think you are a leader who cares, actually.
I think of myself that way. So I do. I appreciate the vote of confidence, and no, it's great. I love what you're doing with the project, and it's great to talk to you. And I think we are in a time where we really need leadership, where so many people are feeling a sense of despair and just not suffering, and we need leaders at every level, and to start trying to do something to change that.
Yeah, leaders, kindness, caring, a little hug here or there doesn't hurt, and so I agree 100%. Thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, my pleasure.